I would like to introduce the CEO of Arizona Town Hall, Tara Jackson, who will lead our meeting out. And I tell you what, we're so pleased to have this relationship. It's just a great relationship, and I think you do just a great job. So thank you, ma'am.
Thank you again. Thanks so much, Chancellor, for hosting this for us. And really, this is a partnership. This is a community partnership. Embry-Riddle has been a wonderful partner in working with us to really benefit their community here in Prescott, and we're thrilled to be able to do it again. I'd like to both not only thank them again for all they do to help host this, but also the Ray and Patty Newton Family Foundation, who helped us put this together with funding. So let's give them a round of applause. Really, people and organizations who are dedicated to their community. And that is what oh, that's right. I knew this would happen to me at least once. I have to point that way, right? Not to the screen. The Arizona Town Hall is actually all about that. I see a lot of new faces here today. Would you raise your hand if you have never been to one of our town hall discussions? That's what I thought, a lot of you, which is wonderful to have you here to see how our process works. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, not too long, but most important, what you need to know is that we're a nonprofit. We've been around for over 55 years, and our mission is about bringing all of Arizona together. We take on some of the most complex and controversial and challenging issues, and we take them on using a process that first is based on trying to get the best factual background possible with the diversity of people, facilitating the background report. You have a summary of that report in your materials, and I'll go over some highlights. I see a few of you have either printed a copy of the full report off, good for you, you get a gold star today, or you may have grabbed one from the center of the table. Those are online and those are a resource. What we find with every topic is that once we start discussing it in the community, many other people have information, and I certainly encourage you to look that up and to utilize that. For purposes of our process, it is important to stay focused on the questions that we have today, because what you do here today is not just about today. We are having conversations on this topic all over the state, and we're looking for where the state can come together, not only in the Prescott area, but throughout the state on these topics. Where can we move together to help solve the criminal justice issues that we have? And if you want your discussion today to build on those discussions, remember to stay focused with the questions that everyone around the state is discussing. Just this week, we have 3 of these programs. Next week, 3 more. And so there are lots of these conversations going on building up to the statewide town hall. So keeping that in mind, our process, which you'll hear more about in a minute when I introduce your facilitator for the day, Pat Norris, it's also very important that every voice is equal. And at this particular event, I noticed in the registration, we have a lot of attorneys. I am one, so I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Attorneys like to talk a lot. And we also have a lot of students, and students may sometimes feel challenged to speak up, knowing that you're sitting with a couple of very informed attorneys. I want you to know, and I want to stress for everyone in the room, that every voice is equally important in our process. So it's important for when you have your table discussions to try to honor that and to trust our process. Students may not be experts in the field like some of the judges and county attorneys here, but you are experts in your viewpoint and looking to the future. So we want you to really weigh in equally. And here's a trick on how to do it. Show your body language. It's a great way to weigh in. If you have an assigned table facilitator, they'll be looking for that and trying to look for where there's common agreement with everyone at the table with some of these challenging issues. So because of the mix in this room, I really wanted to emphasize that the students here, we really care about your voice. It's extremely important to have that voice be equal. Our process is about building consensus, at least in these community town halls. We have a variety of tools that we use to try to get communities talking and working together. That is the process we'll use today, and Pat Norris will tell you a little bit more about that. We do this not only in these community events, but also there will be a statewide town hall on this topic, November 9th through the 11th. All of these community town hall discussions build up to that event. If that's something you are interested in attending, where you meet with people from around the state on this topic and build a report, just let me know, and we'll see if we can't get you there. So with that, I'm going to move on to setting the stage with just some of the facts. You can look at that handout that is part of your packet behind the agenda. You'll see a summary of some of the key facts that you would find in the background report. I'm going to touch on them. This is just one of your areas of information, so you can have an informed discussion. The other, of course, area of information is all of the participants at your table. They all have valuable insight as well. And this summary is based on, I am really channeling the editors of the background report and in fact using a version of their PowerPoint. So just a couple key facts. Arizona's population continues to increase. That has been happening for decades now. The total number of crimes has decreased. So, you know, it's not all bad news. I am pointing there. There we go. Violent crime is down by 20% since 2006. Since 2006, property crime has also dropped 36%. I think it's good to start out with some good facts. Now, a lot of this may be because cars are much harder to steal, and the value, and so really that is probably a key factor there, because the value of property stolen per capita has dropped by 72%, probably in large part because of the drop in cars and advanced technology. Now, in Arizona, the incarceration rate has gone up as the crime rate has gone down. There's a lot of discussion about what, if any, correlation there might be here, and it's not entirely clear how those are related, but that can be some of the discussion that a lot of groups are having. What is the cost of our criminal justice system? You can see there on your handout, it's not cheap. And by the way, there's a lot of costs that are not included in the costs that you see up here are in your handout, such as public defenders and some of the other costs to society. But on average, for the state, it's $525 per person per year is what the cost is. And again, that does not include everything. It's just to give you an overview. There are over 12,000 police officers in the state, and there are also federal officers. About 500 judges handle 2 million civil and criminal cases annually. And the majority of those cases are minor traffic offenses. So that's what most of the cases that come into the system. About 42,000 prison inmates and about 14,000 in county jails. And about 85,000 people on probation for any given year. Here are some other areas of interest that have come up, and that is that 1 or 10% of prisoners in Arizona are over the age of 54, generally considered perhaps not as violent or concerning. More than a quarter of inmates suffer from mental illness. One of the facts I learned in looking at this research, actually from the Department of Corrections director, is that the Department of Corrections is the single largest provider of mental health services in the state. I think that's something interesting to think about that I hadn't thought about. Or that most of the prisoners in the prison system were actually victims as well. Something else that I hadn't thought of. These are all things that I learned as I'm investigating these issues. 90% of female inmates have experienced physical or sexual violence before they arrived in prison. And then there are other difficulties that occur if you're running the criminal justice system, including offenders who have developmental disabilities, chronic illness, substance abuse is a huge issue that I'm hearing about in all corners of the state in Arizona relating to the criminal justice system. I even had one lifelong prosecutor had just retired who told me in all my years as a prosecutor, I only had one violent crime that did not involve substance abuse. I thought that was a profound on-the-street statistic to think about. What is the impact on substance abuse in our criminal justice system? And thinking about that as we think about how do we help solve those issues. Native American issues have, there are some special concerns there because of all the different laws that impact tribal lands and the overlapping of those laws. So in the background report, it kind of takes you a journey through the system. That's how it's set up. I'm just going to show you, you start with the police, bail, jail, fines, and fees. That's another area, charging, sentencing, and the incarceration rate. And then release and recidivism. Notice the circle, because in Arizona, and this is true throughout the country, there is a large recidivism rate. If we wanted to cut down on the number of prisoners in jail, just looking at recidivism would be one key area to look at. So let's go through those very quickly. Some of the key issues or key facts around those. When it comes to police, when citizens view police actions as legitimate, they are more likely to obey the law. So how does that impact how policing might be done? And as I think everyone in this room knows, the public has shown a lot of interest in policing practices in recent years, and that's been one of the policy issues that has certainly come up as we've been discussing this topic. Bail and fines and fees have been another issue that has come up, and in Arizona, there's already been a lot of work done on that. One of the new facts I learned is that bail is actually not a good indicator of whether or not someone will return for a hearing. So that's kind of interesting. And then the other fact to consider is that if you don't have money, what is happening if you can't pay for bail? Are you mispaying a fine? And how does that impact the system? So there are a lot of reforms being done in Arizona looking at this, which is great. Charging, prosecutors generally have discretion in deciding what charges to press against a defendant. There are some national aspirational guidelines that some prosecutors use. And the decision not to charge is considered by most to be the most powerful tool of the prosecutor. And the charges do influence key decisions on everything else that comes after that. Sentencing and incarceration. I'm just going to go down to the second bullet on here, that Arizona has, depending on the stats you look at, the 4th or 5th highest incarceration rate in the country. So we have a lot of Arizonans in prison per capita. 39% of those who are released return to prison within 3 years. So that's that recidivism issue to look at. And often those returning to society lack the resources to establish themselves. I mentioned earlier the stats about mental illness and substance abuse. So consider that. If someone gets out, how are they able to reintegrate back into the community? Often there may be challenges with access to transportation, employment. Think of those applications for employment. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? How many does that just take absolutely out of the ability to get a job? And there are also a lot of healthcare concerns. So looking at how to support those coming out of the system within a community can have a big impact on reducing the crime rate based on recidivism. Something for communities to think about. So now we're going to turn to the town hall process. You have the questions in front of you. You have an overview of the process. I have 2 amazing volunteers who are going to help you move through the process today. Most of what the town hall does is done with high-level volunteers. We're very blessed to have them. So today we're going to have the person who's going to facilitate the discussions. She'll explain the process. And then often the one doing the hardest work in the room, the recorder, Eric Marcus over here, he won't get to say much until he reads something back. And so you'll get introduced to Eric in a little bit. And now I'm going to introduce you and turn the microphone over to Pat Norris. Given the topic, I'll call her Judge Norris, but in town hall fashion, we usually just use the first name, but only for today. Let me turn it over to Judge Pat Norris.
Actually, Your Highness is okay. Maybe Your Worship, but that's okay, we're on a first name basis. Seriously, we are really on first name basis because every voice here is important. And I know many of you are elected officials, and as a matter of respect, we always call you by your office, but please, it's first name today, okay? You may wonder, how are we going to do this? We have about 50 people in the room, and how are we going to come up with a organized process here? Well, I will tell you how we're going to do it. The way we have worked this is that we assigned you all to various tables. And we have done this by design because some of you have experience in aspects of the criminal justice system. And we want all of your experiences to come to bear on this. And so we have tried to diversify the table so that all of you can participate. Then we've asked a person at each table to be the table facilitator. And that person is designed to be a little bit of a traffic cop, and also someone to make sure that everyone participates. And then we ask at each table that one of you agree to take notes of the discussion. And we're going to have 4 questions that we're going to discuss today. And you can vary that role, because maybe not everyone wants to be the scrivener. Now, this is the important point. During the process of discussing the question, what you're attempting to do is to reach a consensus. Now, a consensus is not a vote. Congress votes. We reach consensus. A consensus may not necessarily be 100% agreement at the table, but it's where most of you may agree. I mean, I think, for example, I think all of us can agree we need to do a better job keeping people who are who have been in prison, who have now served their time, to help them, give them tools to stay out of prison. We don't want them back in prison. But how we get there, you may have different points of view on. But the key is focus on what you can agree on. Don't spend a lot of time trying to advocate a position that will not reach agreement at your table. So again, it is a consensus-driven process. Then what's going to happen? Well, this is where really kind of the magic happens. We will then go around the room after you've had some time to address each question. And then I will wander around and ask, for example, the coyote table, you'll have someone who's going to speak for you, to report back to the whole crowd as to what it is you discussed and the consensus you reached or the thoughts you had on that question. And I'll go around the room. And for example, let's say hedgehog, they agree with coyote, or they have a slightly different point of view, but somewhat consistent. Eric is doing the heavy lifting. He has the hard job. I have the easy job, because he's going to be listening intently to your discussion. And he is going to be distilling those points of consensus and agreement. And I'll be looking around the room. And if coyote and hedgehog and all the other tables over here are on a point, and somehow hummingbird is in birdland somewhere else. It may well be that's not a consensus for hummingbird, but that's a small group of the people in this room. So Eric will be looking to see what is the consensus of the overall group, and he'll be distilling that and pulling it out. And then we'll give him a couple minutes to collect his thoughts. He will read it back to you, and you will hear what you discussed. And at that point, I will say to you, have we captured it? Have we summarized the consensus statement, the consensus that you have reached on these questions? This is not a time to have new discussion, because we have to move forward. But it is to make sure that we have properly and accurately captured what you have discussed. And so Eric will be doing that after each question. Now, let me just check my notes here. I'm a firm believer in running on time. I mean, really running on time. So we will start on time, we will end on time, I promise you that. If you need to use the facilities, they're up that ramp, and I'll just get up and use the facilities. I think if we're running on time, we'll have a short break about midway through. Now, the one thing I would like you to do when I turn this over to you to work is I'd like your facilitator to go around the table and have everyone introduce themselves. And I would model this by saying the way I would introduce myself, other than your worship, I would say, I'm Pat Norris, I'm a retired judge from the Arizona Court of Appeals. And that's it, 1 or 2 sentences. We do not need a long wind-up. I just want you all to understand who's sitting with you, okay? So then the facilitator will read the question. I know you all can read, I know that. But the facilitator will read the question to make sure everyone is on topic. Now, one of the things that's really important here is that everyone be heard. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how do I avoid repeating myself and monopolizing the conversation? And I give you a suggestion I always tell everyone at these events. Consider in the back of your mind what I call the 60-second rule. If you have spoken for about 60 seconds, chances are you are becoming a lawyer because you are repeating yourself. Okay? So if you have spoken and made your point at about 60 seconds, it's time to stop and let someone else speak. And if you follow that process, everyone will be heard. And so also, when you report out, I'd like you to follow that 60-second. And remember, the person who's taking notes, you're not just like a court reporter taking down what everyone says. You're trying to see, and your facilitator will help you, what it is that you're agreeing on and moving forward in that manner. So Eric will have the hard lifting. And then finally, as we march through the morning, we'll be talking about priorities and goals. And I'm going to try and gently push you. I do have my hammer and shovel outside, so if I need them, I'll bring them in to really push you. But I want you to be specific, because you see, what you discussed today, we'll memorialize that. And we will share that with every other community town hall that will happen in this state. And then in November, when we have the statewide town hall on this topic, we will make sure that everyone who participates has your report and knows what the folks in Prescott were thinking. And so you will, even if you can't be at the November town hall, you will be there in your words and your thoughts. And so I want you to think about being specific. For example, if we come out today and you have something like the following: we need a criminal justice system that encourages rehabilitation. Well, that's nice. That's pretty broad, isn't it? It's pretty vague. How about something such as, before inmates are released from prison, the Arizona Department of Corrections should make sure that in the year before they're released, they undergo an intensive course on what to expect when they re-enter the community, with a special focus on how to look for a job and obtain housing. Now, I recognize that's kind of long and wordy, but you get the point. That's specific. People can understand that. We can then go, you can then go to your elected officials and you can say, I agree with town hall. This is a good idea. What can we do to get there? So I'm going to push you to be as specific as you can. So I think with that beginning, my anything I've left out?
I just wanted to ask a question. Is this on?
Try that.
With those in the back table, because that was our overflow table, if any of you wanted to participate in the discussion, we have some extra chairs. You can just come join a group before we get started. If you're just press or memorializing it, you can stay where you are. That's all.
So if you're pressed, stay back there. Come on. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to start the first question, which is as follows. And it is, what should be the principal goals of Arizona's criminal justice system? Now, think about, there's a lot of things that go on in our criminal justice system. Punishment, rehabilitation, safety. Should there be a goal of making sure we get return of our dollars, because we're all taxpayers? So what should be the principal goals for the Arizona's criminal justice system? And what I'm going to ask you to try and do, I'll give you about a 2-minute warning when it's about time to wrap up. And I anticipate that we'll go for about 20 minutes on this. So with that, please go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Again, my role in terms of being your recorder is to try to capture the consensus that I have heard from around the room. So you may not hear your exact words, but the goal is to try to capture the intent of the consent of the group. Criminal justice in Arizona is a complex system which must satisfy many different needs and play many different roles. Paramount is the need to ensure and promote public safety and accountability. To achieve this goal, the system must provide punishment and deterrence, balanced with providing rehabilitation and post-incarceration preparation in an environment that is also safe for inmates. The system must be fair and equitable to all and provide justice for victims of crime. The system is also called upon to play a preventative role in the community, including diversion programs, school-based programs, early intervention in the lives of our youth, and leadership in drug and mental health treatment. Reducing recidivism is also a critical role, recognizing the importance of reintegration programs that include vocational training and requiring that the criminal justice system be an integral part of our communities. One of the most significant issues we face is the need for robust mental health and substance abuse treatment programs that reach people in need before they are arrested. Arizona's prisons and jails have become the largest facilities housing the mentally ill in the state. The movement away from state mental hospitals and similar facilities have made the criminal justice system their place of last resort. We need to reach our youth while they are still in school, and programs that incorporate ex-offenders with lived experience can be extremely effective. More counseling resources in our schools could identify at-risk youth early and give them the help and guidance they need. Schools should also promote civic responsibility and incorporate community service. Police need to be approachable. Many in need of mental health and substance abuse care are fearful of policing authorities, so we need to find new approaches to outreach. We need to ensure that our police and other first responders have mental health first aid training combined with resources such as mobile crisis intervention teams. We need to work closely with police to train and provide consistent policies that help them make the best decision about how to address and possibly divert people with mental illness and substance abuse issues. Advocates could be leveraged to work with the families of first offenders to help create a supportive environment. We invest significant resources in probation and post-conviction treatment programs, but we should be making those investments early to prevent criminal activity. There is also a major equity issue in rural versus urban funding. Diversion and treatment programs are not adequately funded in rural Arizona. We need to continue to expand collaborative, cross-functional approaches that involve law enforcement, healthcare, all three branches of government, nonprofits, and other professionals. A very successful example in Yavapai County has been MATForce. Another important program is the Crisis Stabilization Unit at West Yavapai Guidance Center. We need to create and expand public awareness of the importance of treatment and prevention programs to support legislative action and public funding.
Give yourself a round of applause.
We need to ensure that convictions do not become a life sentence. Effective reentry programs are critical to reducing recidivism. They need to include job readiness and assistance in finding jobs, transportation, and housing. Community-based reentry coalitions, including government, faith-based organizations, nonprofits, and parole probation are extremely successful. Parole and probation in Yavapai County works successfully with many community organizations to create a continuum of care. Programs that include peer supports and counselors are also very important. Education during incarceration, especially vocational training for living wage, sustainable jobs, is very important to rehabilitation and reentry. Cognitive behavioral programs, in addition to substance abuse and mental health assistance, are also important. Pre-release counseling is needed to help people develop plans, including transportation and housing, and identifying available community resources. Availability of these resources is critical and can be very challenging in rural Arizona. While we need to be respectful of victims of crime, we also need to recognize the burden that criminal fines place on people who are convicted and consider alternatives such as community service. Substance abuse training during incarceration must be continued during reentry and may include monitoring halfway houses and promoting access and attendance in 12-step programs. Tax incentives could be used to encourage hiring people who have been convicted. Volunteer coordinators who can assist and coach people in reentry should also be encouraged. The Yavapai County Reentry Program, engaging a mentor to help community reentry and including families, has been very effective. Family support, including pre-release intervention with the family, creates an environment which promotes rehabilitation. Yavapai County mental health and veterans court diversion programs have also been very effective. Expanding community involvement in reentry will keep recidivism down.